So we have Harrison here. He's the Executive Vice President and General Counsel for LandBridge and WaterBridge. Why don't you go and tell us a little bit about kind of your different roles and current business at these companies?
For sure. So the LandBridge WaterBridge universe is a portfolio of companies started in produced water management back in 2017. Our financial sponsor is a private equity company called 5 Point Energy based in Houston. And what started with a very small produced water system that was mostly on paper, not actually in the ground. Now we run 4 different companies. We have 2 produced water companies. We have a oil field landfill company called Desert. And then we have LandBridge, which originally started in 2021 to support the water companies. And I get into that more. But now is more of a standalone entity. We took it public last year, and it's been a great success story for us. Yeah. But we have a very unique setup in the sense that we have the same management team running 1 public company and then 3 private companies, which is pretty exciting at times.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of work, and you guys should really pat yourself on the back for all the different hats that you kind of have to wear.
A lot of hats.
So I think pertinent to a lot of the younger people here is kind of how you got started in your career, where you went to school, and kind of how that morphed into kind of where you are today. So if you could just talk about kind of graduating college and deciding, what path to take.
For sure. As most of you will find in your careers, they will be nonlinear, and you will probably back into whatever success you end up having, which is certainly the case for me. I could not have planned this if I tried. But when I graduated Vanderbilt in 2005, I didn't have any marketable skills or marketable interests, really. And so I went to law school to just kind of kick the can down the road. And I was fortunate enough to end up at UT for law school, which was 3 years in Austin. I would do it again in a heartbeat. It was so much fun. And then got through the law school process, got more serious, figured out what kind of law I wanted to do. I had some great internships with Vincent Elkins in Houston and Bracewell, and ended up going to Bracewell and doing capital markets work, mostly for energy companies, for about 7 years. And then had an incredible opportunity to go in-house at a midstream company that was about to go public called Pentex Midstream Partners. And that was the first foray into sort of the commercial work and the midstream side. And that was a great experience. After Pentex, we tried to do it again. That did not work. And after a year, I was unemployed. I had a 1-year-old and another kid on the way and just needed a job. And WaterBridge, which had really just started, was looking at going public. It was 2018. They thought they could go public as a regular way, master limited partnership, which I had experience doing. They needed a general counsel, or thought they did, and they needed one that was really cheap, and I fit the bill. So that's how I ended up at WaterBridge. When I joined, we had probably 4 or 5 disposal wells south of Pecos and maybe 30 miles of pipe, but we had this huge system on a map that looked great, and that's what we were trying to sort of have momentum to go public. And we had a good line of sight growth. It was a good story. It ended up being actually 100% true, but the public markets were not ready for a water company that was structured as an MLP for a lot of really good reasons. So anyway, we ended up staying in the business and growing it. But when I got to WaterBridge, I was probably employee number 30, and now across the portfolio, we've got over 500 employees.
Wow.
Going from 30 miles of pipe to today, we've got 2,400 miles of pipe, mostly in the Delaware Basin. We had, 4 or 5 wells in reality and a bunch of permits. Now we've got almost 200 facilities, and so just a tremendous amount of growth over the last 7 years to keep up with the industry's need for produced water management. Now, when I got to WaterBridge, I didn't know what that was, so I'll explain it here. When you produce oil and gas, most of what you get out of the well by volume is not oil and gas, it's water. And it's produced water, also referred to as salt water, And this is water that doesn't have a whole lot of other uses. And so historically, the best thing to do has been to inject it back into a depleted formation for sort of permanent disposal. And that's the business model. And in the Southern Delaware Basin where we started, water-oil ratios are 5-to-1, 7-to-1, 10-to-1. And so there's just a tremendous volume of water coming out of these wells. And the larger the oil and gas wells, the more water you have. And it got to a point where producers just couldn't, not economically truck it, couldn't physically truck it. You can't line up enough trucks to do that. You've got to do it by pipeline. You've got to have large permanent infrastructure to do that. You've got to have, very strategically placed disposal wells to handle the volumes. And it's really this sort of fairly new industry that came because of the success in drilling oil and gas wells out here. And I was fortunate to come into a team. I had no experience in any of this, of course. The team saw this happening and was able to get in front of it and say, look, we have a solution we know the industry is going to need, and they're going to need it really soon, so we're going to start going and building it out. And honestly, that's our success in a nutshell there.
No, very, very interesting. I feel like you guys made a foray kind of into LandBridge. Was it sort of serendipitous that you created this surface company off of the WaterBridge platform, or what was sort of the calculus there and kind of shifting from creating a produced water management company to a universal kind of surface right of way ownership company?
Well, when we're building our infrastructure, of course, you have to work with landowners. You have to get easements and right-of-ways, and disposal wells are no different. That's a right that the surface estate holds, so you're negotiating with whoever owns the land out there. And what we noticed very quickly was that whoever owned the land kind of got to write the terms, and if the more land you own, the more you can kind of dictate that. Mm-hmm. But also the more you can offer producers, efficiencies of scale. Having to go through one landowner versus 10 is a lot easier. So we always kind of had back in mind, like, man, sometimes it really feels good to be a landowner. But this was when we were just in the infrastructure business. And almost immediately, Jason Long, our CEO, got a line on a big ranch that was coming up for sale, potentially. It was called the Hanging H Ranch. It was a position of about 67,000 acres that stretched from the state line in Loving County down almost all the way to Fort Stockton. Not contiguous, but kind of, sprinkled throughout there. And it was put together by a rancher in the late 20th century for ranching purposes, as people did out there. And then once he passed, it went to his heirs. And some of them wanted to keep the land, some of them wanted to sell, but the land had immense value, we thought, because of the water resources under it, which you can sell for a variety of purposes, but mostly hydraulic fracturing, but also tons of unused disposal capacity that we could put wells on. And we worked really hard to buy that first piece of land, or that first 60,000 acres. It took almost 3 years. We entered contract like 3 different times, several lawsuits, and it also took a long time to convince our sponsor that this was strategically a really great idea. But we bought it 100% for the synergies with the water business, because we knew we needed space for disposal. It was in a really hot area, and it just kind of fit. So that was the thesis originally, and then once we bought it, and started thinking about other things we could do with it, and other value that there was, and other land that we could look at, and really not just for us, but unlock the ability for a ton of people to build infrastructure across wide swaths of land in the most busy part of the Permian Basin. That seemed like a pretty good business opportunity. And so we kept out on, after that initial purchase, we strategically, looked at other pieces of land, and then once it got big enough to kind of be its own thing, it was sort of underwritten by WaterBridge, but WaterBridge is not even close to a majority of its revenue at this point. So it's mostly third parties. It was a good candidate to take public. And so we were able to do that last year, which is a very interesting process, start to finish. But it's been a tremendous success story.
Yeah, you guys have had phenomenal performance just on your IPO, since your IPO. And I guess maybe one topic that came to mind is kind of understanding messaging your value proposition to investors when you do your investor roadshow, if maybe that's something you could talk about, just
yeah,
what it
we
was like.
apparently did a horrible job at that because we priced below the range and then shot up first day of trading and then continued to do that. So I don't know. It was sort of bittersweet. We were really excited about this going in. We're like, this is a great value proposition. And then to have kind of bad performance on the front end, but then incredible performance on the back end is just it's a very bizarre phenomenon that really nobody could explain to us. Certainly not our lead underwriters. But I think there's not a lot of companies like us. There's one. It's Texas Pacific Land, which is a really cool story in its own right. They own about 3 or 4 times as much land as us, but they inherited it through a bankrupt railroad back in the late 1800s. But they've had phenomenal stock price performance and, a very similar thesis to what we had. But if you have one comp and they're much larger, it's a harder story to tell, I think. But people are catching on to it now, and people also understand the WaterBridge synergies, which are real. So it's just been incredible to watch. And then this was not anywhere close to our thesis when we started, but then you've got the data center opportunities and the AI and the infrastructure build out for that, not just for the centers themselves, but for the power plants they need, for the gas and electric lines that they need to feed those power plants and the data centers. And again, if you're a large landowner and you have strategically positioned land, you're in a great spot to capture those opportunities because you can provide the land, you can provide the water that they need for cooling, you can provide adjacent land for power plants, you're close to gas storage, and so it just makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, I think that intersection of kind of the old energy industry with the new energy industry and the new economy is just really fascinating. Could you maybe talk more about some of the conversations that you guys are having in terms of processes for data centers or new power lines, power generating capacity, just at a high level, not any specific details, but I think a lot of the students here are really interested in that particular angle, just that new economy angle.
Yeah. I will not provide any material non-public information. And actually, I think the very first deal that we did after we bought Hanging H in 2021 was a Bitcoin mine down near Fort Stockton, which I think we were all really surprised that they were interested and they were going to go do this. And we made them pay up front for a 20-year lease because we were like, I don't know if you're going to be around in a couple of years. But they've been successful and they're still operating on the ranch. And so it's a story that happened very quickly. But yeah, data centers, there's a ton of interest out there, not just for us. There's several other large landowners as well. There's TPL. There's University Lands. Their CEO's here today, Billy. So there's a lot of places in the Permian Basin that you can put these data centers where the landowner can provide a lot of these solutions. And we certainly want to be in the mix, and we think we've got some advantages. But yeah, right now it's definitely the exploratory phase, but we're having talks every day. We hired a guy from Microsoft who's super sharp and understands this world because it's very different from the water, dirt world that we are used to living in. But he speaks their language, and it's been really cool to see sort of how these opportunities are emerging and what people are interested in. And originally there was a lot of talk about renewables, and there's actually a ton of renewable resources in West Texas. If you've ever driven from Fort Worth to Amarillo, you've seen it's just wall-to-wall wind turbines. We don't have a ton of wind turbines where we are, but we do have a lot of solar facilities because there's a lot of land and there's not a lot of trees. And so it's a really good place for solar facilities. So there's renewable energy out there, and I think, as everyone may be aware, the Texas grid has been taxed recently, and so it's easier to build your own power resources if you need them for upstream wells or disposal wells. So that already exists, but originally a lot of the data center discussion was around, well, you can provide these renewable energy solutions. And that's true, you can, but the first data centers out there are going to run on gas generation 100%. They're going to have diesel backups because they need redundancy. And so it's really more of a strategic positioning story, I think. And then, in the future, renewables or, small nuclear may be a better solution. But when these guys were making their 50-year investments up front, they're thinking proximity to gas, proximity to transmission.
Yeah, I think the fact that you guys have the sandbox for investment kind of across your portfolio, and people look at your land holdings and they say, what can we do here? I think it's a very kind of cool value add. In terms of kind of like macroeconomic or places where maybe students at UT, where you're seeing a lot of growth maybe for students and where maybe there'd be good job opportunities going forward, are there any particular areas that you've been looking at and sort of just,
We need a ton of field engineers, I'll tell you that. If there are any field engineers in the crowd, let me know. But yeah, I mean, it's, like I said, I backed into this job. I couldn't have designed it this way if I tried. So I think, the most important thing starting out as a newly minted graduate of the University of Texas is, find a great employer where you can be around other people that you like and you can learn a bunch. And that perfectly described Bracewell when I started. You don't, certainly now, you don't have to join a law firm or any employer and be there forever. People move around a lot more than I feel like they probably used to. But I don't think there's any replacement for being around a bunch of other young people and mixed with very smart people who have whatever experience you're looking for. It's very tough to get out there and be an entrepreneur on day one, as we've kind of discussed. People can do it, and honestly, that's how Jason Long, our CEO, kind of did it. But I think there's if you go somewhere, especially a place like Midland, and you're working for a larger company, and you're just around a lot of people, that's going to pay, and you do well. That's going to pay dividends for you, 10 or 15 years down the road when either you want to go start a company or your friends start a company and they need somebody with your skill set. So I think that's applicable across all industries, honestly, whether it's upstream, which is traditional, or more data center driven infrastructure, which again, a lot of the data center infrastructure is going to look a lot like oil and gas infrastructure. It's going to be gas pipelines. It's going to be overhead transmission, and then you're also going to have these huge power plant projects. And you're also going to need people to sell them diesel. And so I think that's why we will see that development in the Permian Basin eventually, because it just makes so much sense. And we or somebody else certainly has the land for it. But those are going to be, I think, mostly started by very large companies to begin with. No one's going to go build a data center on spec. So getting in good with somewhere that has a training program that you like, where you like the people, and sort of having some level of camaraderie there, again, it's just going to pay dividends down the road.
Definitely. So you kind of do a lot. It's very clear at your different roles across these companies, but sort of what advice would you have for students in terms of giving back to their communities? You're here today out of your own free time, speaking to kids. So what advice would you have toward giving back?
I mean, I think find a way to do that interests you. I mean, if you're an oil and gas guy, don't feel like you need to go join the board of, the Houston Ballet to give back. Like, find something that, or maybe you do. It's not me. But find something you're interested in, and I think that will, sort of naturally open opportunities up to you. Like, I'm very interested in energy. I'm very interested in UT, so this is perfect for me. When I was at a law firm, and less so now, although I have a fantastic stable of attorneys at LandBridge, we did a lot of recruiting from UT. That was always, honestly, one of my favorite weekends of the year. Come back to Austin, wine and dine kids, make friends, see old friends. Like that. That's people don't think of that as giving back, but you are. I mean, you're creating opportunities for students and creating, futures they may not otherwise have. If I came back and I ran into a law student that said, hey, look, I want to do exactly what you're doing, and, I can talk to that person like a normal human, like, I'm going to do everything I can to help them. And we ended up with a lot of really great attorneys at Bracewell just by doing that.
So, advice for, let's say you're a junior in college, you're about to hit the job market with, your resume, and kind of any advice you'd have to those kids in terms of how they should approach the hiring process. Should they be open-minded?
No, you should definitely go to law school instead. That would be my advice. It's way more fun. 3 more years of college. But I think whether you're a law student or an MBA student or undergrad, obviously reach out to whatever contacts you have. This was always something that the career office at UT told us, and I was like, I'm 24 years old. I don't have any contacts. Like, what do you mean? So maybe that's not going to be an avenue that is open to everybody. But try a lot of different things. Apply to a bunch of different jobs. Again, I think find an opportunity or a situation where you like the people, you're interested in the work. It's something where you can at least sort of excel at. You don't have to be the best. You just have to not be the worst. And I think you're gonna stand out. So just leave yourself open to opportunities. If that involves moving to Midland, do it. I think honestly, a lot of the people that I work with who started their careers in Midland, maybe not completely voluntarily, again, it's paid dividends for them, and they look back on that time. Some of them are still there, but even the ones that have moved on, it really helps them stand out today.
Yeah, so I hate to kind of move around a bit, but sort of back to the LandBridge, WaterBridge relationship. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what your plans are going forward in terms of growing those businesses, particularly like WaterBridge, and where you see that prospectively? So,
I think the Permian Basin is the best place in the world to drill for oil and gas right now. And the Delaware Basin, which is kind of the western extent of the Permian Basin where we are, has some of the best rock for oil and has a ton of water. So it's a great place to be for a produced water company like ourselves. So I think, there's some kind of regional concerns that are going to push water out of the basin to other areas as the pore space in the basin gets kind of filled up with water, which it has been over the last few years. So we just announced a big project to take water from kind of Eddy and Lee County in southeastern New Mexico over to the Central Basin Platform in Texas. And those types of opportunities, it's a big infrastructure project, right? You're building, 100 miles of 30-inch pipe out of the basin, and then you're building a bunch of disposal wells. It's big dollars, but a company like WaterBridge has the backing and the resources to do that. And we have the we've proven ourselves with customers, but they're comfortable that we can execute a project like that. And so we've got a couple of those going on right now. Certainly, I don't know if anybody's from New Mexico here. I'm not going to disparage New Mexico, but it's a very different operating environment than Texas, and they have a lot more restrictions on what you can do. And one of the results of that is a lot of the volumes produced in New Mexico are coming into Texas for disposal. And some people are happy about that. Some people are less happy about that. But at the end of the day, New Mexico has basically said, we don't really want to encourage produced water disposal here, but we do want to encourage all the oil and gas production. But you also can't use fresh water for oil and gas production, which is maybe not the worst thing in the world, so you got to recycle. And so New Mexico is just sort of a different market, but they're really leading the reuse charge in terms of what are the alternatives to disposal via underground injection for produced water? What can you do with it? You can reuse it for fracturing, which we do every day. There are a lot of companies that do that every day, and that's a great thing to do. Are there other things you can do with it? Can you desalinate it? You could, if you have a lot of money and you're willing to spend it on that. Can you use it to irrigate? Maybe not. Also requires a fair amount of treatment that's a little bit expensive, but people are working on that. Can you use it for municipal use? Absolutely not, never. That's never going to be a thing. But finding ways to put it back into the water cycle are good. And every produced water company out there and a lot of other companies like TPL are working on ways to do that.
Yeah, I think one really underappreciated aspect of your business is that sustainability component and using less water and recycling water. And you're kind of on both sides of the produced water and the gathering side. What would you say about kind of on the LandBridge side with fresh water that you guys are producing from aquifers? What would you say kind of the market dynamics of that are in terms of where do you think the market for fresh water? Do you think we'll live in a world of scarcity where there'll be more value in holding this real asset in fresh water, or maybe that there'll be new technology that's sort of gonna unlock more freshwater resources through desalination? Or
I think it's a combination. I think there's also probably at some point going to be technological breakthroughs on the upstream side that may require fewer volumes or of any sort of water for fracturing and production. But yeah, one of the benefits of being a large landowner is, and the relationship with LandBridge is that if somebody needs water for completions, they would typically go, or maybe required to contractually go to a landowner, and they would get what we consider to be brackish water, which is not fresh water that you can drink or irrigate with or water cows with, but it's not the super salty kind of brine water that comes out of an oil well. It's somewhere in between. And they'd sell that for completions. And if you're a legacy rancher or landowner in the Delaware Basin, and you can't really farm anymore, ranching, you can ranch, but it's not super economic necessarily. One of the best businesses was selling water to operators, and so they did a lot of that, and we inherited a lot of that on Hanging H as well. But now we can push producers towards using recycled produced water. A lot of producers want to do that if they can anyway, depending on how large they are, what their ESG goals are, what their sponsors want. If you're a small guy starting out, you want whatever's easiest and cheapest and most economic. If you're a super large producer like Chevron or Exxon, you have a ton of other considerations where you may want to do something even if it's a more expensive solution. So there's a lot of opportunities there. Again, as a large landowner and as an operator that can aggregate huge volumes of produced water, WaterBridge can sell you raw produced water for you to treat on your own. We can treat it ourselves and sell it to you sort of as a finished product. and sort of everything in between. And so that's a business that we're in. I think it's going to continue to be a larger part of our business, but it's an opportunity that we have because of the investment we've made in permanent infrastructure and because of the contracts we have that again allow us to aggregate these kind of huge volumes. That again, similar to the huge volumes that come out of a well when it's drilled, you're using millions of gallons to frack a well, and so if these producers are moving to 4, 6, 8 well pads, you need a ton of water resources for those operations.
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal the scale at which you guys operate, and I think it's very hard for the average person to understand just how big these wells are and how big these infrastructure projects are, and how you're pushing around hundreds of millions of barrels of water potentially in a day.
It's shocking. I mean, every time I go out in the field and see the scale of these operations, I'm just honestly shocked. It's a huge undertaking, and drilling and completing a well as a producer requires a ton of coordination across dozens of vendors, and water is one of the most critical things they need. So anyway, it's sort of a weird symphony that it takes to get all that done. But yeah, you're right. The scale is unimaginable. But so we started out with 67,000 acres when we bought Hanging H, which is a very interesting situation all around. But today we've got a little bit less than 300,000. Just to give you a sense of scale, that's about half the size of Travis County. So it's a really big land position. It's not 100% contiguous, but a lot of it's concentrated on the state line, where there's a ton of water coming down from New Mexico, but also a ton of producer activity. To put that further in context, I don't know if anybody's familiar with university lands, but that they fund the Permanent University Fund that funds UT and A&M and several other schools. They've got about 2 million acres of land, and they've got very valuable minerals. So we're about like 15% the size of university lands, which is not bad since we started, less than 4 years ago. But anyway, there's a ton of land out there.
Yeah, no, it's truly amazing, and I think when I've talked to sort of other students in the UT complex, they're really interested in somewhat the oil and gas side, but most certainly kind of the new economy stuff. Thank you, Harrison.